What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and we're back for another episode of the fighting game tutorial series. Specifically in this episode, we are going to be going over continuing to clean up our animation blueprint. So if we come into our game and we can load up one of our maps, when we come in here, we will be able to do everything that we can normally do. You may notice your performance starting to improve if you're doing a lot of these things, because some of these things are getting rid of any extra content we had. Is removing actors from the scene. We have more work to do and we're going to continue doing it, but it certainly is starting to pay off. So hopefully you've been enjoying these cleanup episodes and you've been cleaning up your project with them. But if you haven't, I still think it is good to clean up as much as we can before getting into more advanced mechanics. Again, I always mention story mode, AI, rollback netcode, online play in general, as these are some really heavy hitters, and we do want to make sure that we are in a really good spot to be able to handle this behavior, and also just to work with it as a developer, because that is good too. As always, before we hop into the episode, if you want to get caught up in the entire series, you can check out how we've created our fighting game, from hitboxes, animations, commands, different modes, and a whole lot more. I'll link you to the top right corner right here, where the entire fighting game tutorial series playlist is. Alternatively, if you only care about the animation blueprint and cleaning it up, that's perfectly fine. You don't have to follow the whole series to do this, but I do recommend you watch the previous episodes of the cleanup for the animation blueprint. That way you'll be able to follow along with exactly where we are and continue cleaning up your animation blueprint alongside these episodes. So with that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. This is a code and blueprint tutorial series. With our animation blueprint, it is just that, it's a blueprint, so we're only going to be focusing in the blueprints today, and specifically our AnimBPs for our characters. So go to your mutant AnimBP, or whatever your character is, go to that blueprint, and when you come in here, we have some cleanup that we can perform. What I want to focus on in today's episode is our hitboxes, and specifically create active hitbox. So one of the most important features in our game is our hitboxes, and specifically creating hitboxes that deal damage to other characters. And the way we have handled this so far is we have an anim notify that fires when we reach a certain part of an animation, and we know which hitbox relates to that animation, so we know which hitbox to spawn at any given time. So in this specific example, you see we have our medium active anim notify, and we grab the corresponding hitbox data table row, and mutant hitbox data, medium attack hitbox 2. And if the row is found, then we grab the data from the row and pass it into the hitbox. Now, while this is good, and I think it is perfectly fine to handle things this way, one thing that I'm noticing and that I've been dealing with for a bit is whenever I add a new attack, I have to pass along all the data from the data table row into the function just to be able to use it. And that is pretty inefficient, especially when we're dealing with lots of attacks. If we just pass the entire hitbox into this function, we would have all the data for it, and every function could be the same. We wouldn't have to go back and update old things. Like, for example, I haven't gone back and updated this medium attack animation with fields that have been added since then. So technically, even if I set should cause daze, should cause crumple, should cause air reset, or any of these parameters in here, on the data table, it won't update because in the animation blueprint, I haven't updated these fields and connected them again. So some of my more often used ones, like my rifle punch, I make sure that I have everything passed in. But since create active hitbox in particular is going to take in every parameter of the hitbox, as you can see here, every single parameter is used, we're not sending any more data by sending a structure into this function. However, if we send the structure into this function and this function handles everything based off that structure, we don't have to worry about things like this. And also the nodes in the event graph will get a lot smaller and there'll be less repeating logic. Let's go ahead and act on this information. If we go into create active hitbox, you'll see that what happens here is we have a bunch of parameters, basically all the parameters from our hitbox data structure, and they're being used to perform all the various logic in this function. We're not going to clean up any more of this function today, but you can tell that there is quite a bit going on in here. So instead of having all these variables separate and being passed in on their own, we could just pass in a hitbox data structure. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So if we go to the inputs on our create active hitbox function and press plus to add a new parameter, we are going to change this to hitbox data, the hitbox data structure. And we can call this hitbox data. And now you'll see at the bottom here we have our data structure. And instead of using all these parameters, we can simply drag off hitbox data and break it, and we get all the same parameters. So if we were to replace all of the connections from the parameters here with the parameters from our break hitbox data, then you wouldn't notice any difference. So next one is hitbox damage, and then we have hit stun frames. And just be careful, make sure you are connecting the right one. You'll know you're connecting the right one if when you make a connection, like block stun frames here, the connection from block stun frames on the function disappears. Then we have pushback distance and launch distance. Let's continue now. So we do have a few of our transforms here. We need to right click and split our struct pin. And we can get our hitbox transform parameters, so our location, rotation, and scale. And we can split the location again. That's how we get our location Y, which is being used right here. Then we have location Z, which is being used here. Then we have rotation, which is being used here. And scale here. Hit sound here. Should cause ground bounce here, and pretty much we're just going to go down the row here. This should be pretty easy. And there we go. So we've already replaced every single parameter in this function with the hitbox data parameter. So at this point, it will already work the same way that it did prior to our change. And now that means we can get rid of every single connection for create active hitbox if we don't need it. So let's make sure first. Let's go back to the event graph and make sure that this is viable for every case. At this point, we want to find every single create active hitbox, and we want to connect the out row from the data table directly into the create active hitbox function. So out row to hitbox data. And this should work. This should work right away. You see we get no errors or anything, and that means we can remove the break hitbox data and just call the function here. And again, we're going to want to do this for every single one, and there are probably quite a bit of them, so just be aware that you may be here for a second, but just connect your out row to the corresponding function call. And you shouldn't have any special cases where you're hard coding something outside of the data table. We did not set the series up that way, but if you are, make sure to transfer it to the data table. That way nothing gets missed. But for me, it's going to be pretty straightforward, luckily. I might have some overlaps because of the long function nodes, but that's going to get cleaned up when we get rid of the parameters that we no longer need. You can see even here we have it. If you've been following the 3D fighter, the same method applies. Remember, this is only create active hitbox right now, so things like throw, projectile, proximity are still going to use the old method. There may be more in my animation blueprint, and I can double check, but at this point we've gotten most of them. At this point we caught most of them, so we can go ahead and remove the extra parameters on create active hitbox. So now you can go down this list and just start Xing all of these, and you'll see the nodes will shrink. And now we're down to just hitbox data. And so now spawning a hitbox looks just like this, which is so much nicer. Now we see that we have some missing logic in some of our pins, right? This is what I was asking to check for. So if we didn't pass hitbox data into it, it is going to fail. Now, if we don't have a hitbox data entry, the real solution is to add a hitbox data entry. But if you have temporary attacks or you don't want to update your hitbox data right now, you can drag off the hitbox data and make a hitbox data and pass your data in here specifically for the time being, and then refresh the node. At this point, it will fix that error. Now I have quite a few of these. I've got about 6 of them. So again, the real fix would be to actually make the hitbox data table value, which I likely have if I go to my blueprints, functional BPs, actually library BPs, and then my mutant hitbox data, you can see I have a lot of my attacks here, but I do not have all of my attacks. I don't have my crouch hitbox 1, crouch hitbox 2. You will want to make sure that you have every hitbox in here. Again, for the time being, to make it quick, you can just make sure that you have something passing the hitbox data. But any values that you chose that you want to keep, make sure you transfer them over into your hitbox. When you refresh this node, you are going to lose that data. So if you were actually using valid values in there and not in your data table, make sure you transfer them over to either this node or preferably into the data table and use that as an entry. My values in the series are pretty much all just placeholders. I put those values in because they do feel right or feel good. I don't really have a final value for them. So as we continue in this series, I will make sure I get all of these accounted for. I'll make sure that I'm not missing any, but you can tell there were 6 that I was not using a value in the data table for. And so I have this on video, so we can transfer these values over to the data table. Always do it at a different point. It is really not a problem. I just want to keep reiterating that because I don't want you guys to lose your values because you're just making a hitbox data, refreshing this, and you had values in here that you actually spent time creating and perfecting. That would not be good to lose because this data does take a long time to properly grab and set. But once everything has a value here, you'll be pretty good. I have a few warnings as well, and when I go to them, you can tell these ones have less data, but same rules apply. We should be using the data table for all of these at this point. And now we've captured all of them, so we're pretty good to go. At this point, everything is much smaller, so you can move them together. You'll probably need to reorganize your graph a little bit. It looks much nicer now that the nodes aren't huge. But now you should be able to come into your game, and all your attacks that had damage on them will still have damage on them. So if we come into our training room here, and I come over here, I can still do damage just fine to my characters. This is in practice mode with regenerating health. If I try and do one of those moves that I replaced the hitboxes on, you'll see I don't have a crouching light anymore. This is the price for not having those values in all of my data tables. That is why I need to update the data table to include every single move that I have. And that's okay. We're going to fix that up. So I'll go through and make sure any that don't have an actual data table row are added to my data table. And then we'll make sure we update the animation blueprint to include them as well. Now I'm going back to my data table, and I'm going to speed this part up, but I am going to copy all the fields from the values that we had in the animation blueprint into the data table, and then get that data table row. You can slow this down if you want to see each specific value, but these are the specific values I set up earlier in the series, and you can even see them earlier in this episode. So just follow along with me here and do this for all of your hitboxes, at least your strike hitboxes. At this point, we want to go back into the animation blueprint, and we want to replace all of our make hitbox data nodes that we added earlier with our actual row from the data table. So we want to get data table row. We're going to pick our mutant hitbox data or a corresponding hitbox data table. Then we want to pick the attack or the hitbox row from that data table. And we know what it is because we have the AnimNotify here. So we just have to line up the AnimNotify with the hitbox that we want to spawn. I'm going to do this for all of mine that I did not previously have them for. I'm going to speed this section up as well. At this point, you can launch your game and test out all the attacks that we swapped. They should all work and they should function exactly the same as they did prior to this episode, but now it will be easier to add more features to them and just edit them in general in the future. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, and you're happy with the cleanup that is occurring in the animation blueprint and for our hitboxes, then please subscribe and consider to the Patreon, YouTube membership, or Discord subscriptions, which helps me out greatly. I appreciate everyone who has. Thank you guys so much for all the love and support. I'm so happy you've been enjoying the series. If you ran into any problems following this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. There is a link in the description, and I would be happy to help you out. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.